Hello, welcome to a video which is the first in a series to help teach you how to use Adobe Photoshop. In this lesson, we're going to learn some basic concepts, and you're going to learn how to take a photograph from your digital camera and save it in a more reasonable size. One term that you should know is called image resolution. Image resolution refers to the size of an image in pixels. This is measured in horizontal by vertical pixels. For example, on my iPhone 6, the usual image resolution is 3264 by 2448. If you multiply those two numbers, it comes out to 7.99 million pixels, or about 8 megapixels. You've probably heard the word megapixels before, referring to the quality of a camera image. Most monitors on computers, however, are less than 1,600 pixels wide. Therefore, an image which is 3,200 pixels wide is much larger than the monitor can show. As a result, it really helps to bring the image resolution down. The next concept is image file size. This refers to the size of an image in bytes. For example, if you take an image with your smartphone, the size might be 2 or 3 megabytes. However, if you're going to send that by email or put it up on a web page, you have to understand that some people who have slower internet connections would have to wait a fairly long time, even just for a 1 megabyte download. Therefore, it's always a good idea to bring the image file size down to something that's much less than 1 megabyte. Next is the image file type. Most images are JPEG, sometimes spelled JPG or JPEG. JPEGs have good color and image quality. JPEGs can also be compressed to make their file size smaller. Too much compression, however, can hurt the quality of the image. Remember that a common website image might be at most 600 pixels wide and 200 kilobytes in size. It's probably less than that unless the image is shown all by itself at a very large size. Let's take a look at what a JPEG might look like. Take, for example, the image at the top. This is an image which is 70 kilobytes on the disk. Now, in JPEGs, you can compress the image so that below we have the same image at 4 kilobytes. This is much smaller in terms of image file size, but you'll notice that the quality of the image is much worse, especially the fringing around the edge of the mountain where it meets the sky. So obviously you want to have a good balance of image file size and image quality. Now, to prepare an image to make it smaller so it's better to send or display on the web, you want to do three things. Number one, you want to crop the photo. That is, cut out any unwanted parts that are not necessary to present in the photo. Number two, you want to resize the photo. Make the resolution fit to your page. If it's 3,200 pixels wide, you want to make that much smaller. Probably no more than 1,200 pixels wide, but probably a lot less than that, depending on your needs. And then finally, you want to save the photo. Choose a JPEG setting, a compression setting, that makes the file size smaller, but maintains a fair amount of quality. Here's an image that I will be showing you in Photoshop in a few minutes. You'll notice that in the first image on the left, there's a lot in the photo that I don't need. There's some of the ceiling, a bit of which is stained and ugly. There's books on the bookshelf. I really only need my face in this shot. So what I can do is I can crop the image. I can cut out the edges of the photo that I don't want and only keep the central part of the image that I do want. Next, I want to take a look at the actual image size in resolution. It still may be way bigger than I need for my web page or my email. So what I do is that I set the resolution or the image size to be smaller, so it's closer to what it is that I want. Finally, I save it to the disk. I save it as a JPEG, I choose a level of quality, and now I've got an image which is only 400 pixels wide, 526 pixels tall, and is only 37 kilobytes on disk. This is much more reasonable than the original photograph, which is 3,200 pixels tall and was more than 2 megabytes. Let me show you this process in Photoshop. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to do this in Photoshop, and I would like you to follow the same process that I took. So the first step is to take a picture of yourself. Now, when you take a selfie, very often you're using the front-facing camera on your cell phone. But I don't want you to do that because the self-facing camera is usually of a lower quality, and the image that you take will probably be low resolution. I'd like you to take a very large resolution image, and this is usually with the camera on the back of your cell phone. Now, if you don't have a cell phone, then either borrow one from a friend, or you can also use a digital camera so long as it also takes images of a fairly good file size. So I took one right here, and you can see that I've got it right here. It's got the image name from that my cell phone gave it. It's fairly large. The resolution is 2448 by 3264. It's a little over 2 megabytes in size. So I'd like you to do that first and put it on your computer in a place that you can remember. I put mine in my libraries and in my pictures folder. So that's step number one. Step number two is to open Photoshop. You probably do not have Photoshop on your computer at home because it's a very expensive program. You might pay as much as $1,000 for this program, so you'll probably want to use the ones in the Media Center lab at school. There's also a few versions of Photoshop available on computers on the 5th floor. These are the computers that are made by the Computer Making Club. So let's go ahead and go into Adobe Photoshop. The icon is a box with the letters PS. It's a blue icon. And if you open it up, this is what you'll see. A few points about the program. You'll notice that there is a menu bar along the top. Excuse me. You'll notice that there is a toolbar along the left side, along with some controls underneath the menu bar. You'll notice that on the right-hand side, there are some palettes, and we'll get to these a little bit later. And along the bottom, you'll see that there is some information here as well. This will become a little bit more clear when we open up a photo. So let's do that step next. Step number 3, open a photo. So let's go to the File menu and go to Open. So I already have my pictures open, but you want to navigate to the place where you have saved your picture. So I'm going to click on that and say Open, or I could just double click if I wanted to, and it will open up in Photoshop. Now, it usually will open up like this, where you can see the whole image in the frame of the window, but you'll notice with some new information that popped up in the status bar at the bottom that it shows you the zoom. This is zoomed only at 25% of the actual size of the image. Now, there's a couple ways to change the zoom for this image. You can do a Control minus to make it smaller, or a Control plus to make it larger. If you're using a Japanese keyboard, the plus is usually a shift key, and so you might have to do Control Shift plus 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 in order to get that done. But if you're working on the English language keyboards in the Media Center, then it's very simple, just Control minus and Control plus. You can also use some other keyboard shortcuts. For example, Control 1 will shift to 100% zoom. So you can see that this is much larger. This is the actual per pixel representation, and you can see why we need to change the photo is because it's way too big for the screen. Doing Control 0 will zoom out again and make it so that it fits nicely into the window. So if you take a look down here at the lower left side, you can also see, in addition to the zoom size, there's something here which shows you the size of the document if you save it as a Photoshop file, but if you click on that and hold it down, you'll see that it also gives you your width and height in pixels. Okay, so now we're going to edit the photo, and the next step we're going to take is to crop the image. So once again, you should be doing all these things along with me. Just go ahead and pause the video whenever you need to stop and catch up on your computer. So to crop the image, you want to go to the controls at the left, and you'll see that there is a little sign here that looks like this. This is the crop button, and this icon for cropping is actually a very common one. You'll find it in many different applications, the exact same symbol. So you want to go ahead and click on that, and when you do, take a careful look at the edges of the photograph. I'm going to click the crop tool here, and now you'll notice that along the edges of our image we have these little crop marks. So what you're going to do is that you're going to click and drag on one of these. Probably the corner is a good place to start, and you're going to drag it in, and you'll notice that it starts to bring down the viewable area in your image. So I want to cut out all these parts of the photo that I don't want. You can use this grid to help center your photo so that hopefully your eyes and nose and mouth will be about in the center of the photo. And when you're finished, there's a couple things you could do. You could, for example, click on another button, but if you do that, it'll ask you if you want to crop the image or not. So you can say crop. However, an easier way of doing this might be just to hit the Enter key. So I'm going to bring it down again and set the areas I want to crop. Here we go. Make sure that the image is centered the way I want it to be. Now, if you just hit the Enter key, you can see that it crops that way too, and this way when you click on another button, it doesn't ask you for a dialog box. All right, so we've cropped the image. The next thing we want to do is to resize it, that is, change the resolution. So you'll notice that if I hit Control 1 and go to 100% viewing size, you'll notice that it's still way too big. So I want to change the resolution. Well, right now the resolution is 1,184 pixels wide by 1,520 pixels tall. Now, if you're sending it in an email, this still might be okay, but as you can see, it's larger than it needs to be. And if you're putting this on a web page, it's definitely way too big. This would completely fill up the entire web page. So we want to change the image size. For this, you want to go to the Image menu in the menu bar, and here we have image size. You can see the keyboard shortcuts are listed here on the right in case you ever want to use those. So I'm going to click on image size, and it shows me the size of the image in pixels. If it does not say pixels on your computer, you probably want to change that. And then you want to change what width and what height you want to use. Now, you want to pay attention to this little icon over here on the right. If you click it, you'll notice that nothing happens. So you want to take a look at this little icon on the side. That means that these sizes are linked, so that if you change one of them, let's say if I want to change the width to 400 pixels, you'll notice that the height changes at the same time. To make it not do that, then you want to click off Constrain Proportions. You'll notice that icon is now missing, but really you probably want to constrain the proportions. Otherwise, it's very difficult to set the size, or your image might get distorted. So let's change this to 400 pixels wide. That brings us to 500 pixels tall, and all you have to do is click OK. So now we're at 100% viewing size, but now our picture is a lot more reasonable sized. You can still make it smaller on a web page or in any other place you want to display it, but at 100% size, it looks perfectly reasonable. Now, for the final step, we want to save this back to the disk in its changed form. Now, we want to save this as a JPEG file. And a JPEG file, you can adjust the quality in order to make the image size bigger or smaller in kilobytes. So let's see how to do this. Once again, you want to go to the menu bar. We're going to click File, and we're going to go down to not save as, but we're going to do Save for Web. This allows you to very carefully choose exactly what quality it's going to be. Now, first of all, we can choose from different file formats. We can save it as a GIF file, but that's kind of low quality. We could save it as a PNG, which is higher quality, but it's a bigger file size. For example, if I save it as a PNG 24, you'll notice that this is 320 kilobytes in size. But if I save it as a JPEG, I can get it down to as low as 8 kilobytes. Now, this is at 0% quality, which means that, as you can see, if we zoom in on the photo, you can see the quality is quite poor. So what we want to do is that we want to make it a slightly better image quality. Now, you could do it at 100%. That means that you'll get some compression, but the emphasis is on the quality of the photo, and you can see the quality is much nicer here. And if we take a look at the file size, already we can see it's down to 150 kilobytes. That's half the size of the PNG. That's why people use JPEGs a lot more than PNGs. Now, we can still get a better file size and still keep a fairly nice quality. If you bring it down to about 60% quality, you might notice that the image quality is still very good. Only if you look very carefully, you can see that there's a little bit of distortion in a couple of areas. But the image quality is more than good enough for what most people would need. And now you can see we've brought down the file size to just 42 kilobytes. So once again, we're saving it as a JPEG. Usually you want a quality of about 60%. It can be a little bit higher or a little bit lower. And then once you've got, whoops, excuse me. And then once you've got the settings straight, you can go down here and just click Save. You'll want to choose a location to save it. I'm going to go into my libraries, and I'm going to go back into my pictures where I've got the original photo, but that's okay because I'd like to give it a different name. Now, IMG2818 is not a very good name to save it as because it doesn't really describe what's in the image. So I'm going to call it Luis and Portrait. Now, if I'm going to put this on the web, I don't want to have a space. So I'm going to say Luis _ Portrait. And there we go. So I'm going to save that. And now I'm finished. So now if I go back into my pictures library, you'll see that I've got the original image right here. The original image is much bigger. It is 2.11 megabytes in size. It's 2448 by 3264 pixels. The changed image, in comparison, is only 43 kilobytes, only a very tiny percentage of the original image file size, and the dimensions are much more reasonable too, just 400 by 514 pixels. So that is how you use Photoshop to prepare an image for the web. So I'd like you to do this with your photograph as well. Make sure that you put both the original image and your changed image into a folder, and then you'll submit that as your week number 1 Photoshop project. Thank you very much.